Hey, hello everybody. We've got a lot to worry about because many of us are getting back to work. We're bringing our devices back into the office. And you know what? There can be a lot of risks around that. What are some of those risks? What are the misconceptions that are out there? So let's get into it right now. And really, let's start with asking a question, which is, what is antivirus software? What's the big deal? You know, way back when on the internet, you had some viruses and you had some worms. They've been around since almost the creation of the internet. Of course, way back when it was just government and universities, that wasn't really the case. There wasn't much going on. But I can tell you, when I was connected to the internet, we started to worry about it. This was back in the early 80s. Of course, it wasn't the internet back then. More so in the later 80s and throughout the 90s when I was doing a lot of work for various companies as a contractor. I was looking at it and saying, you know, something could happen. I got some of this antivirus software because antivirus software is supposed to protect you against these viruses. And the systems that I was running for my clients, providing email for them, I had the equivalent of a website back then, you know, FTP sites, Go Veronica servers and stuff like that, so people could find stuff on the internet. And I got nailed with one of these pieces of nastiness. It was called a worm. In fact, it's called the Morris worm. It was one of the first big worms that crawled through the internet. Think about what happened with ransomware here a couple of years back. Nailed so many companies. Thank God none of my clients got nailed with it because we were protecting them appropriately. And there are ways to do that. What did I do to really protect those clients? Where every division, I had one that was a multinational corporation, and every division got nailed by ransomware a couple of years back. And this one division that we were protecting did not get nailed because we were protecting it properly. Well, that's a kind of a worm, and it spread, it's nasty. Of course, that worm had attached to it some ransomware, some really nasty payload. The one I got nailed with overloaded systems, so they couldn't deliver mail anymore. It was a send mail backdoor is really what it was, if you get right down to it, for those of you who are really techie out there. But I had antivirus software, and I thought, you know what, I'm probably reasonably well protected because I bought the stuff, and, you know, it's supposed to be good, do everything that you need to have done. In fact, of course, it did not, and I got nailed. So what is the big deal? Should you have it? Shouldn't you have it? What is enough? People now are using Microsoft's Windows Defender, which has some antivirus built into it. I've done some courses on those. You might be saying to yourself, hey, listen, I've got Windows Defender. I've got Symantec or McAfee installed, and I can't remember the last time I had a problem. Well, the bottom line answer is no, you are not. Not anymore. The whole malware ecosystem has gone through a mighty change here. The metamorphosis has been absolutely unreal. It's been drastic. And it started in kind of the mid-2000s and has continued up to today. We're at the point now where the old precautions that we were using just aren't enough anymore. Look at the top reasons for this, because I think it's important that we understand what's going on. The first one is, just like I mentioned with the worm a little bit earlier, you don't have to click on a link to get malware. Malware nowadays, just as it always has been, can transfer from machine to machine. Okay, so that's one way that it can get in, by kind of acting like a worm. Another big one, and this is fairly new, it came out some years ago and then kind of fell out of favor and is back in favor now because, of course, the good guys are trying to counter what the bad guys are doing. But this is called malvertising. And with malvertising, what the bad guys are doing is buying ads on these advertising networks. So people who have a website and they want to monetize that website, what they'll do is they'll sign up with an advertising network and say, yeah, okay, you can go ahead and advertise on my website. And anybody that either clicks on an ad or maybe sees an ad, depending on how they want this whole thing set up. It could be pay-per-click, pay-per-view, pay-per-sale, a lot of ways. Anybody that puts that on their website is now showing ads that they don't have any direct control over. So with malvertising, what happens is that the bad guys put their malware an ad that just shows up on a website. Could it get any worse than that, right? All of a sudden, you're not at necessarily a bad part of the internet. You're not at one of these bad websites that you're always getting warned about. But this malicious content now looks at your machine and does one of a few things. It might be a Bitcoin miner. And if it's a Bitcoin miner, it is going to use your resources, and that means your machine is going to slow down, your laptop or your phone is going to run out of battery, right? There's lots of bad-ish things that can happen. It might also have some exploits that allow it to download itself on your computer. These are often called drive-by download. So all you have to do is visit a website, and if that ad shows up, it is going to install itself or its nasty payload right there on your computer, and you are now infected. Now, traditional antivirus responses are just too slow to respond to the new threats. Antivirus software barely protects you anymore. At best, it stops 30% of all of the malware. Why are we constantly being told to buy antivirus and to use antivirus here? Traditional antivirus response time is slow. Traditionally only stops about 30% of malware right now. And when we're talking about zero-day malware, it's even lower. In fact, the estimates are that antivirus software is about 0% effective against modern threats. So when we're talking about the latest ways that the bad guys try and get into our systems, all of this anti-malware software is really not doing us very much good, because the antivirus software just doesn't understand what's going on. It can take now as much as a month or 6 weeks for the antivirus software to be able to adjust itself for these new attacks, which is bad. Now, some of these antivirus companies say that they can get it done in 8 hours and maybe even get to the 90% level when it comes to the newest threats that are coming out as they come out. But listen, it takes them a week or more to try and get to the point where they can help you, because typical antivirus software only looks at yesterday's threats. That's the antivirus software that has signatures and engines that are designed to look for what it's already seen. Think about what's happening with this COVID virus that we have right now. It's called a novel COVID virus. Why? Because it's never been seen before. We don't really know what it's going to do, how fast it's going to spread, what the mortality rate is, right? That's what this whole lockdown thing has been all about. How do we deal with that COVID virus? Well, we can see much the same thing when we're looking at viruses on the computer side. These new viruses that are coming out are unknown to us. They're like a novel virus where we've never seen it. We don't know what it does. We don't know how it spreads. Now, in many ways, we know that a virus is going to behave more or less like the flu. We know more or less how it's going to spread, and we know various other things. Same thing is true here in the computer world. Many antivirus companies have gone to the point now where they are looking for symptoms. There's a recent study that was released called the Enterprise Strategy Group, and it showed that almost half of the businesses that were polled had successful malware attacks on them, even though they were running antivirus. What does that tell you? Half of them had malware. So we've got a lot of exploits going on. They have really stepped up their game with this whole coronavirus thing because we're at home now. We don't have the tech people there from the business to help us and are using our home computers. Let's just go through BrianKrebs' 3 basic rules of online security. BrianKrebs has been writing for years about security and computers. He has a blog called Krebs on Security. Great guy. Number 1, don't install software that you did not explicitly request. In other words, if all of a sudden your computer pops up and asks for an install, is it okay to install the software, and you did not go out and download that software explicitly, deny it, okay? Number 2, keep your installed software up to date. That is crazy important. We've talked about that many times because software that's installed that is not necessarily kept up to date is a problem. Software that's installed that is kept up to date can be a problem as well because it might have its own vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So if you don't need it, uninstall it. So let's continue on here with antivirus. Let's talk about all the different pieces of software that are out there. I named a few at the very beginning here, right? We've got Windows Defender, you know about Symantec, you know about McAfee. Those are all of the consumer ones. Those are the main ones, right? And Symantec has a whole suite now. McAfee has a suite. Of course, Norton is part of Symantec nowadays. But the bottom line is there is much more out there, and you just don't hear about it because they don't spend a lot of money advertising. The one that I like and I use with my clients, and the one that protected my client from that nasty piece of ransomware is Cisco's AMP, which is an advanced malware protection. Let me tell you, AMP, it's kind of my secret sauce, right? I use AMP and I use Umbrella. The edge, the network edge, I use a Firepower firewall. And we tie that into a whole management server so we can keep track of things. But right there is pretty much everything that you need. But there is a huge difference between the traditional antivirus stuff and what I was just talking about. I was just looking at Staples the other day, actually before coronavirus. Would that be BC, before corona virus, BCV. So I was over there looking around and the traditional antivirus software was selling for about $120. And you're going to pay for the really good stuff probably about $50 a month. So it's definitely more expensive. And then, of course, the $120 plus you have to buy upgrades and everything else versus this, which is just kept up to date. So all antivirus software is not the same. Let's talk about the next step beyond just the basic antivirus. You've got the traditional stuff, right? AVG, that's something I used for years. Symantec, McAfee. Sophos is another one I should mention. They have a very basic way of doing things. Users report a virus or malicious file that has somehow made it onto their machine. So you've got this malware dot file, right, that got installed on your machine, and it's doing ransomware, deleting files, sending your intellectual property somewhere, whatever it's doing. So users find a virus or, some sort of a malicious executable, a malicious file on their machines. The next step is they report it to one of these companies. They'll often send a copy of it so that the company has it and can investigate and can come up with a signature and can check to see if their antivirus engine can handle this type of a virus. And they might have to make changes to the engine depending on what's happening. So the next step is that these antivirus vendors add a signature for that piece of malicious software that was found by the end user to their list of known viruses. So think about that for a minute. How many people know enough to report a piece of malware? Would you know enough? Most people don't. So they are depending on people who understand computers and understand security to report these things. Well, to find them in the first place, right? And then to report them. And so next up is they've got it set up and they have to distribute the signature list to all of their clients. So every client that might be, let's say AVG got this reported. AVG will now send it out to all of the people who are running the AVG software. Many times it's just a weekly update. In some cases, it's a daily update. I tend to like it when it's a minimum of an hourly update or as needed. But at that point now, the antivirus software has a code signature for the virus. And think of it again in medical terms. Your body, once it has seen a virus that causes a flu, recognizes it next time, doesn't it? So your body knows it has to fight it off, and it knows how to fight it off. Same thing's happening here with the antivirus software. The antivirus software gets the signature list from the vendor, and now if it sees that virus, it knows what to do. And so it goes ahead and blocks it just automatically next time it sees it. Now here's the problem. The bad guys now know that their particular piece of malware isn't working anymore. Because guess what? The antivirus guys have come out with a patch that stops, or signature, either way, that stops their malware from spreading. What happens next is that the bad guys make a change to their malware. It only has to be a slight change, just a slight little change, so that signature is no longer valid for their malware. It can be one line of code. It can be that simple to change. And now they can send it out and it is fully effective again. And this entire process has to be repeated. Pretty bad thing, frankly, when you get right down to it. And it won't be detected again until the antivirus vendors a report from a user who sends in the malware. The antivirus company looks at it and confirms, yes, indeed, this is the malware. And then they come up with a signature, they distribute it, and then the whole thing just circles again. This model has what I think is a very obvious flaw. If the malware is frequently changing itself, you're in big trouble with antivirus software. Next step here is they go ahead and they have the code modifying itself. So now it can easily bypass the signature-based detection that's out there. So the next generation here of anti-malware software, which is the stuff that we use for all of our clients, including our home clients, is behavior-based. So it's looking at how it is behaving. If you have a novel virus, if it's acting like a virus, you treat it. It's really that simple. This is also called the next generation anti-malware software. It ties in with these next generation firewalls that we use and you should be using. There are a number of products in this space. I mentioned already Cisco, but Carbon Black, which used to be Bit9, CrowdStrike. These behavior-based products differ dramatically from your traditional signature-based products because they look at the behavior of software that's on the computer rather than just checking the file, doing a checksum basically of that file and taking a look at that signature against a known list of malicious files. Behavior-based can be looking at, well, how many files is this program opening? Is this program opening files, writing to them, and closing them? Think about that for a minute, because that's exactly what ransomware does. Why can't you detect that? Why can't you stop any of that sort of stuff? They look at what is it doing when it comes to, in Windows, to the registry. Is the registry being modified? Is it going in there doing something it shouldn't do? Is it installing other files like rootkits? Is it self-registering the program so that it auto-starts the next time the computer is booted? Or is it modifying trusted programs in your system directory on your computer? Now, here's a real big problem that we're starting to have now, because remember I said antivirus software is at best 0% effective against modern threats. Well, the most modern threats today are what are called fileless malware. Antivirus software is working by looking typically at files on the disk, downloaded through a drive-by download or onto your machine through a back door that wasn't closed, a patch that you hadn't made. It looks at the file there and all of the files on your computer, scans them, and is looking for those signatures that we've been talking about. So think about that for a minute, right? Have you used antivirus software? And have you noticed how it wants to do a file scan? Windows Defender wants to do file scans. Well, the way the bad guys get around this is using something called fileless malware. And that's malware that does not have a file on the disk. There is no software installed on your machine. If you clicked a link in an email, maybe you went to a website that had some sort of JavaScript or, heaven forbid, Flash installed on it, and that then started your computer running some of this malware. What is next generation malware? 50% of all malware out there today is utilizing this fileless malware. The way it does this is it's using trusted Windows tools. Microsoft went and adopted something from the Unix world, referred to as the command line, the CLI, command line interface. The problem with the command line is that it takes a while to learn. But once you learn it, you're way faster than pointer click. You know, click is something that's been adopted because businesses thought, well, this is going to be so much more productive. Look, we can bring people on board and online very, very quickly. That might be true, but the other side of that whole equation is how much work can they get done in how much time? That's where the command line gets to be very powerful. In the Unix world, you've had something called shell programming, again, for many, many decades. And this allowed you to write real quick, very simple programs that did things that you needed to have done. The whole Unix philosophy, at least back in the day, was have small, simple programs that can be well-defined, but make sure that they don't have malware in them, and to make sure they are working properly, put them all together, string them together with pipes, and life will be good. Well, in the Windows world, Microsoft, as they often do, adopted things that they learned from other vendors out there. And this is something pretty much every business does and should do, frankly. And the thing I don't like about the way Microsoft does it is they claim they invented it, right? So Microsoft came up with their own shell. They call PowerShell, and it frankly is vastly inferior to any of the Unix shells. Well, certainly inferior to Z shell or even the C shell. But they have PowerShell, and they have the Windows Management Instrumentation, it's called WMI. These are tools that can be used by attackers. Now, they are used by administrators, and surprisingly enough to me, Microsoft has stopped putting everything into their user interface. Some things that you need to do as a systems administrator, you now have to do in PowerShell. Well, Microsoft has only been doing this for years, not many, many decades. And Microsoft Windows has always had an absolute plethora of security problems. It was just poorly designed to begin with. It was never thought of to have security. Never, right? Security, the internet, all started in the Unix world, not in the Microsoft world. So now they're finding major problems with security surrounding PowerShell and Windows management instrumentation. The bad guys coming in and using those tools now to perform their malicious acts. With PowerShell, they can take all of your files and send them. They can encrypt all of your files. They can delete your files. With PowerShell, basically, they can do anything that they want to do. These tools that are trusted by Windows can be used to carry out an attack. Now, when you were talking about the fileless malware, which does include things like the PowerShell and the Windows management instrumentation, those types of fileless malware can be caught based on behavioral anti-malware. What's happening is the behavioral malware, anti-malware, is looking at what's happening on the system and is saying, whoa, wait a minute now, why is this program opening up, bam, 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 all of these files? That's not normal behavior. Or why is it deleting all of these files? Why is it doing these various things? Now, Microsoft also has a file system that allows you to kind of do a recovery if you need to. And that's also another great reason to make sure you have a good backup, right? But it can be caught and it can be stopped. But the traditional anti-malware software out there is not going to be able to do anything against this fileless malware, nothing at all. So the next big question really is traditional antivirus software useless? Well, it depends on what useless means, right? It isn't useless. It can detect these older types of hacks, no question about it. But, software or vulnerabilities where there's no patch, where it's a 0-day vulnerability, where there's no signature for it, where the malware is automatically modifying itself, and a traditional antivirus software isn't going to do any good at all. None. Behavioral-based antivirus is one of the few good options for automatically detecting and stopping these threats that are arising from the 0 days. By definition, your traditional antivirus software is useless, okay? So what we have to start looking at is something that's known as a hybrid approach. So you are using more than one way to detect the malware that might get onto your system, and more than one way to try and stop it as well. You still can use a traditional signature-based antivirus software. Now, there can be fights that go on. For instance, if you try and use the Norton Symantec antivirus software and you try and use Windows Defender, both of them have signatures that would indicate to each other, hey, this other piece of software, Windows Defender, is a virus. Or on the other way around, Windows Defender says Norton is a virus. Well, I guess you could kind of argue that, but that's not really the case here. What is happening is they are fighting with each other. And so you are going to have some problems. Behavioral-based systems will sometimes trigger those sorts of fights, but usually the behavioral-based ones don't, because you tell them, no, that's Norton Antivirus that's scanning all of the files out there, or that's Windows Defender that's doing it. Personally, I don't deploy antivirus, the standard stuff. Now, as part of Cisco's anti-malware platform, the Cisco AMP, what ends up happening is it does have the traditional antivirus in it. So, it is good for what that's good for. It has some behavioral stuff for what that's good for. But it also ties into the network and to the firewall to know what's going on. You can set up so that if something starts to spread within a network, it automatically turns off the ports on the switches. It's just phenomenal what they're able to do right now. But what we're starting to get into here now is talking about some very hybrid systems here, where we're doing things like intrusion prevention and data loss prevention. Those are more complex, but they're all things we need to know about. You should be deploying antivirus software and layered security. How do you do that? How is that going to help you as a business? How is that going to help you as an end user out there? What are the ways to protect ourselves when we're talking about all these different types of threats? There's constantly an increase in threats. Number one, remember these 3 basic rules of online security. Don't install software you did not explicitly request. Keep your installed software up to date. And if you no longer need a piece of software, those rules have been around for a while. They are excellent, excellent rules. Nowadays, we have to also include don't click on links. Your bank, if they send you a notification and you're tempted to click, don't click. I don't know a bank, a financial institution out there that if you go directly to their website without clicking on the link, every last one of them will have available, if you've logged in, the notifications they've sent you. So don't click on links. Remember backups, right? I teach the 3-2-1 backup strategy for businesses. And if you're a home user, you should use it as well. But remember that backups, frankly, are another arrow in your quiver of security. Because if things go completely wrong, if you have those good backups, you can then restore and get back in business. It really is that simple. 3 copies on 2 different types of media and 1 off-site. I saw some stats on this a couple of weeks ago. It absolutely just flabbergasted me how many computers are out of date and how these old pieces of antivirus software are still catching all of this old nastiness that people shouldn't be getting anymore because they were fixed in patches. Let's start with layered security, because that's really the way to go, just like almost anything else. In a submarine, of course, you have compartments, so if one compartment fails, all of the other compartments will be fine, right? You have your seatbelt. That's just part of the safety system inside your car. You also have airbags. You've got crumple zones. You've got really strong internal frames and other parts of the structure that are going to help keep you safe. It's important to use multiple levels of security, multiple layers on the computers, because frankly, there is no single technique that's ever been entirely successful. That's pretty much true of almost everything, right? When you're trying to keep anything safe. Key to really being successful is to have these multiple, just like you have with the compartments in that submarine. And there are different types of security measures to help with these gaps and loopholes. Now, there are some stats out right now that are saying that, frankly, people are the biggest problem. Right? We used to call that wetware. You know, the problem is between the keyboard and the brain. In other words, it's you. It's not the computer itself. It's you. Sure, you're not clicking on these things. You're not installing the software you should not be installing. You're not visiting websites that could be potentially nasty. Those are all of the biggest things you can do. There's not much you can do about not visiting a site that has some of the malware embedded in ads. You might call it adware. But because the bad guys, the hackers, are going to try and get in. But one of the keys to preventing an attack between you and me is to slow the hackers down. If we give them less time to do their dirty work, those hackers are less likely to come after us. So the hardening is the important part. There are so many soft targets out there. And I hate to do this, because basically what I'm saying is, don't let them hack you. Let them hack your neighbor, right? It's like you come by my house And there are security cameras recording from every direction. There are security lights outside. You know, we've got the Great Dane. We have attack chickens. We have attack bees. There's a lot of reasons to stay away from our house, and we try and keep it reasonably safe so that when a bad guy comes by, they see, oh, this is potentially a problem house, so I'll just go on to the next one. Our neighborhood, our house, is the only one that has all of those security measures up. The same thing can be said when it comes to layers of security for your computer systems. It starts on the computer itself, keeping everything up to date. Some of them are really nasty. A lot of the stuff from Adobe, like Flash, and also, unfortunately, Reader, Java from our friends at Oracle now, those are all very prone to being compromised. So step one, make sure you have everything up to date. And then the second step is make sure you have a next generation firewall. You need a firewall out there at the edge that is watching it, has an intrusion detection system, looking for anomalies, looking for things that people are trying to download. Not only, of course, detecting it, but protecting against it, stopping it, but also stopping the bad stuff from getting out. Much of the software in this day and age, when it gets onto a computer and gains control of the computer, it calls home. It calls the command and control system. What it's doing when it calls command and control is saying, hey, okay, so what do you want me to do now? Do you want me to send you copies of the files I found, the copies of the interesting files? You want to poke around on here? Do you want to see what's going on? Huh? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? If you can stop that command and control system from communicating, you've now stopped the whole problem. That's how we stopped this massive piece of ransomware from 2 years ago. They figured out how to shut off the command and control system. Actually, a really good little trick. The guy that found it, by the way, ended up going to, at least he's charged. I don't think he's in jail right now. Maybe he is. Now I'm trying to remember. He was at Black Hat, I think, last year. He might be in prison right now. And that's happening more and more right now. So how do you stop it from getting out? These companies that are selling many of these products are just straight out lying to you. Another one of my shows here, talking about what you can do about that, how you can use some of these special DNS services in order to really protect yourself in case you do accidentally click on something, and also how to stop these systems from calling home. Because remember, I mentioned that's a major problem nowadays. If you do get malware on your computer, one of the first things that malware does is call home, just like ET. It says, here I am, I'm on a computer, what do you want me to do now? And if it can't reach home, it is not going to be able to do its dirty work. And that's where some of these systems, like the umbrella stuff, OpenDNS is available for free. It's one I like. We've been using it for years. Cisco just bought them recently. It seems like almost every software package or piece of hardware that we find that's great for security ends up getting bought by Cisco. But OpenDNS is still out there. There's still free levels. We use the commercial paid levels of Umbrella, which just works so well for us. But what we're talking about right now is billions of cyber attacks that are being blocked every year by cybersecurity professionals. And they have these layered approaches that we're talking about, where you have the advanced malware platform on the machine. So it's looking at, is there a signature for this? How is this software behaving? What is this software doing? And then communicating with other computers, not just on the network, but this advanced malware software communicates with the main systems that are watching all of the systems, Because typically what happens is it isn't a totally spear phishing type attack where it's just coming after you. It's an attack that's typically going going after hundreds, if not thousands of people out there. Now, it's estimated right now that hackers can remain inside a system and inside a network for at least 3 months. In fact, historically, it takes them about 2 weeks, 3 weeks after they get into your network as a business and before they start really spreading and moving around. Because there's so many systems they've been able to break into, their command and control is just sitting there waiting until they have time to have a look and see if your information is valuable at all. And that 100 days, that 3 months, it has really been kind of the norm. So we have a little bit of time to notice them. Nowadays, that has changed dramatically. Nowadays, your advanced anti-malware is able to detect that there is a bad guy inside your network within 6 hours. And then you have a total of a few days, a week at most, before you have to get them out of your systems. And then the bad guys usually start working on it in about 10 days to 2 weeks. So that 3-month time frame that we used to have, that we used to be able to kind of rely on, that we didn't, we didn't have to pay that close of attention, it is just absolutely gone. The other thing when we're thinking about layered approaches is having the right defense at the right time. Now, many people who are in the cybersecurity industry now are really getting burned out. And they're getting burned out for the simple reason that there's just too much work to do. That so many attacks are coming in, so many alarms are going off, so many of them are false, that it's overloading. So one thing I want to really emphasize when we're talking about layers here is you have to have a single unified management and reporting system. And the reason I say that is that with a single system, there's one pane of glass for them to look at, to monitor. There's one system to learn. You are going to totally burn out your people, and you are not going to have much security if you have, Norton this, and you've got McAfee that, and Microsoft this, and you've got a SonicWall that, and you're trying to pull them all together. It's absolutely going to destroy your security. And it's going to destroy your security because none of these systems are integrated. They cannot do automatic follow-up because there is nothing for them to follow up, right? If they're all disparate systems, they don't know that another part of the system might have caught something evil out there, right? They just don't know, and there's no way for them to understand it or to know it. And then if they do catch something, if they do flag something and notify someone, that someone now has to hop through how many hoops in order to be able to find the data that they need to solve the problem? It could be dozens of hoops, and in some cases hundreds of hoops. And then they have to verify that it is legitimate. Did it really indicate that there's a bad guy in here? Or was that alarm just something kind of normal? It looked like it might have been a virus. It looked like it might have been this. It looked like it might have been that. Now, we have some systems that are in place that we're using. And, it happens again. It happens to be Cisco. But we have the Firepower Firewall. We have some software on top of that monitors all of the reporting from the firewall, monitors all of the reporting that's coming in from all the endpoint devices, etc., puts it all together into a pot and lets us know when there's something that's a higher level that needs a human being to look at and for us to potentially intervene in. That is huge when it comes to solving our basic problems of trying to understand, is this legit? Is this not legit? Because you can get hundreds, if not thousands, of false positives every day. And when you have layered systems that don't know how to work with each other, to report to each other, and to talk to each other, now you've got a very, very serious problem that you're going to have to deal with. So keep an eye out for that sort of a problem as well. There's several things that will happen if you have a properly configured multi-layered defense approach. One, you can detect these threats early. Remember what I was saying? You only have about 6 hours if you want to make sure that you're very unlikely to have anything very, very bad happen to you.